There are times when attention does not settle in one place for very long. Focus moves from one thought to another, then shifts again before anything feels fully complete. The experience can feel subtle, though persistent enough to be noticed. During the day, many small signals compete for awareness. Messages arrive, tasks appear, and the environment continues to change in quiet but constant ways. Each moment invites attention in a slightly different direction. The mind responds naturally to this movement. Attention follows what seems most relevant, adjusting again and again as new information appears. Over time, this pattern can create a different rhythm. Focus no longer rests in one place for long stretches. Instead, it begins to move in shorter intervals, following the flow of incoming demands. This does not mean attention has weakened. In many cases, it reflects how adaptable the mind has become. It is learning to respond quickly, to shift efficiently, and to stay aware of multiple things at once. Still, that adaptability can carry a quiet cost. When attention moves frequently, it becomes harder to remain with a single thought long enough to feel settled within it. A task may begin, though part of the mind is already aware of what comes next. A thought may appear, though it is soon replaced by another before it has time to fully unfold. This creates a feeling of fragmentation, not because something is missing, but because attention is spread across many small points rather than resting in one place. Nothing unusual is happening in these moments. The mind is responding to the environment it has been placed in. When the pace around attention becomes steady and continuous, the mind begins to mirror that same movement within itself. As this shifting pattern continues, it can begin to feel familiar. Attention moves quickly, and the mind adjusts without needing to think about it. What once felt slightly scattered can start to seem like a normal way of engaging with the day. The brain is designed to learn from repetition. When attention is frequently redirected, that movement becomes easier to repeat. Shifting focus requires less effort over time, and the mind grows more comfortable with shorter periods of engagement. In this process, sustained attention can begin to feel less natural. Staying with one task for a longer stretch may require more intention than it once did. This does not happen suddenly. The change is gradual, shaped by many small moments where attention is pulled in different directions. Each shift is brief on its own. Together, they form a pattern that influences how focus behaves throughout the day. Because this pattern develops quietly, it can be difficult to notice while it is forming. Attention continues to respond to what feels most immediate, even when that response becomes more frequent than necessary. Over time, the mind becomes skilled at dividing its focus. It learns to move quickly. Though it may not always feel fully settled in any one place. In that rhythm, fragmentation does not feel like a disruption. It begins to feel like the default way attention operates. When attention becomes used to frequent shifting, staying with one thing can begin to feel slightly difficult. Even when there is a clear intention to focus, the mind may continue to move in small, subtle ways. This experience can feel confusing. The task is simple, and there is enough time to engage with it, yet attention does not fully settle. The reason often lies in how the mind has adapted. When attention has been trained to respond quickly to new input, it begins to expect change. Stillness no longer feels like the default state. In that condition, a quiet moment within a task can feel unfamiliar. The mind may begin to look for something else to notice, even when nothing is missing. This does not happen because focus is weak. It happens because attention has learned to remain alert to what might appear next. That alertness once served a clear purpose. It helped the mind stay responsive and prepared. Over time, it can remain active even when there is no immediate need for it. As a result, attention may shift without a clear reason. A thought appears, then another follows, and the original focus becomes slightly less stable. Trying to force concentration can make this movement more noticeable. Effort increases, though the mind continues to respond in the way it has practiced. In this pattern, difficulty with focus is not a failure. It reflects a system that has learned to move quickly and has not yet adjusted to slower, more sustained attention. A quiet environment does not always create immediate focus. Even when the world becomes still, attention may continue moving in the same way it has been moving all day. This can feel surprising at first. Noise has decreased, distractions appear smaller, and the setting seems ready for concentration. Even so, the mind may remain lightly active beneath the surface. Part of the reason is that attention is shaped not only by the environment, but also by its recent rhythm. If focus has been shifting often, that movement can continue for a while even after external demands have softened. The mind carries momentum. One thought leads quietly into another, and internal movement can continue even when there is nothing outside requiring a response. In these moments, distraction does not always come from the room itself. It can come from the traces left behind by earlier activity. Conversations, unfinished tasks, and brief impressions may continue to pass through awareness while attention is trying to settle. This does not mean the mind is resisting focus. It means attention is still adjusting to a slower pace than the one it practiced earlier. Because of that, silence alone may not feel enough. The environment becomes calm first, while the mind follows more gradually. Understanding this helps explain why concentration can still feel difficult in quiet settings. The outside world has already slowed down. Internal attention is simply taking a little longer to arrive there. With enough space, that movement can begin to settle. The mind often needs a little time before stillness outside becomes stillness inside. As attention continues to shift, small unfinished impressions can begin to play a quiet role in how focus moves. These impressions are not always obvious, though they remain present in subtle ways. During the day, many moments are only partially processed. A conversation may end without full reflection. A task may pause before it feels completely finished. A thought may begin, though attention is quickly pulled elsewhere. Each of these moments leaves a light trace. On its own, each trace is small. Together, they can create a gentle pull on attention. When the mind begins to settle, these traces can return to awareness, not all at once and not with urgency, though enough to influence where attention moves next. Focus may shift slightly, not because something new has appeared, but because something earlier has not fully settled. This creates a sense of divided attention. Part of awareness remains with the present moment, while another part is quietly drawn toward what feels incomplete. The mind does not do this by accident. It is attempting to organize experience, to give closure where it has not yet formed. Still, when many small impressions remain open at the same time, attention can begin to move between them. Each one asks for a little space, and focus becomes spread across several directions. In that pattern, fragmentation can feel stronger. The mind is not losing focus. It is responding to many small points that have not yet fully settled into place. As these small, unfinished impressions continue to gather, they can begin to influence how energy is felt within the mind. Attention is still available, though it may not feel as steady as it did earlier. Each open impression requires a small amount of awareness. On its own, that demand is barely noticeable. When many of them exist at the same time, the effect becomes easier to feel. The mind begins to divide its energy across multiple points. Focus shifts from one impression to another, not because it chooses to, but because each one holds a quiet sense of incompleteness. Over time, this can create a subtle form of mental fatigue. Energy is not lost all at once. It becomes spread thin across many small directions. In that state, concentration can feel more difficult. Attention is still active, though it does not gather in one place with the same ease. A task may begin, though part of awareness remains connected to something else. A thought may appear, though it does not fully hold attention before another one takes its place. This does not mean the mind is failing to focus. It means energy is being shared across several areas at once. The experience of fragmentation often grows stronger in this condition. Focus feels divided, not because it is absent, but because it is distributed. As this becomes more noticeable, the connection between unfinished impressions and mental fatigue begins to make more sense. The mind has been quietly holding many small threads, and each one continues to ask for a little attention. When attention has been divided for a long time, rest does not always feel complete right away. The body may pause, and the environment may become quiet, though the mind can continue moving in small and subtle ways. This happens because attention does not stop the moment activity stops. The patterns formed earlier in the day often continue for a while, especially when many impressions still feel lightly unfinished. In these moments, rest can feel incomplete rather than absent. The mind is not fully engaged with one task, though it is not fully released either. Awareness remains gently active, moving between small traces of what has not yet settled. This can create a confusing experience. Quiet is present, though ease feels slightly out of reach. Stillness exists around the mind, though attention continues to shift within it. The reason is often simple. Fragmented attention carries momentum. When the mind has spent many hours moving between signals, tasks, and unfinished impressions, that movement does not disappear all at once. Instead, it slows gradually. One thought softens, then another appears. A small reflection passes, though some part of awareness continues to remain lightly alert. This does not mean rest is failing. It means attention is still adjusting to a different pace. The outside world has already become calm. The inner rhythm is taking a little longer to arrive there. Seen this way, incomplete rest becomes easier to understand. The mind is not resisting quiet. It is slowly learning how to settle after carrying many small movements for a long time. When the environment becomes quiet, fragmented attention can become easier to notice. During the day, constant movement provides a kind of cover. Many small shifts in focus happen, though they blend into the overall flow of activity. In a quieter setting, that cover fades. The same movement of attention continues, though it now stands out more clearly against the stillness around it. A thought may begin, then gently drift before it fully settles. Another reflection may follow, not with urgency, but with enough presence to shift attention again. This pattern can feel more visible at night or during moments of pause. The mind is not necessarily moving more than before. It is simply being observed with fewer distractions around it. Awareness becomes more sensitive in quiet conditions. Small changes in attention that once passed unnoticed now become easier to recognize. This can create the impression that fragmentation has increased. In reality, the pattern has likely been present for some time. The difference lies in visibility. When the environment grows calm, attention is no longer pulled outward as strongly, and the inner movement becomes easier to see. Understanding this changes how the experience is felt. The mind is not suddenly becoming more scattered. It is revealing a pattern that has been quietly operating beneath the surface. As this becomes clearer, the sense of confusion often begins to soften. What once felt unexpected starts to feel more understandable within the stillness of the moment. Within a fragmented pattern of attention, certain thoughts can appear more than once. They return gently, not with urgency, though with enough presence to be noticed again. This repetition is not random. The mind tends to move toward what still feels slightly open or incomplete. A brief thought that carries little meaning may pass without returning. Another thought, connected to something unresolved, may remain closer to awareness. In this way, attention is not only shifting, it is also being guided by subtle signals that suggest where more clarity might still be needed. These signals are often quiet. A moment from earlier in the day may not feel important at first, though it may return later with a slightly stronger presence. When attention is already divided, these returning thoughts can become more noticeable. Focus moves between them not because it is scattered without direction, but because several points are gently asking to be seen. The mind does not hold on to everything. It selects what still feels unfinished and allows other impressions to fade more easily. In a fragmented state, this selection becomes more visible. Certain thoughts appear again, while others pass through without leaving a strong trace. This can create the feeling that the mind is repeating itself. In many cases, it is simply revisiting what has not yet fully settled. As this becomes clearer, the movement of attention begins to feel less random. The mind is following a quiet pattern, returning to what still carries a small sense of incompleteness. When a thought returns more than once, the mind may begin to treat it as something that needs to be stopped. Attention turns toward it with the hope that it will finally disappear. This response is understandable. Repetition can feel tiring, and it seems natural to want a clearer sense of mental space. The difficulty is that attention gives strength to what it closely follows. A thought that is being watched, measured, or pushed away often remains present for longer than expected. In these moments, the mind is no longer only carrying the original thought. It is also carrying the effort to manage that thought. This creates a second layer of activity. The first reflection remains in awareness, and the attempt to remove it keeps attention connected to it. Because of that connection, the thought may seem even more persistent. The mind is not failing to let go. It is still engaged with what it hopes to leave behind. This pattern becomes easier to notice in quiet moments. There is less happening around attention, so the effort to control a thought stands out more clearly. A different shift begins when the thought is no longer treated as something that must be ended immediately. Attention loosens, and the reflection is allowed to remain without becoming the center of effort. In that softer relationship, many thoughts begin to lose some of their intensity. They may still appear, though they no longer feel as tightly held. What changes is not always the thought itself. What changes first is the way attention stays attached to it. As attention begins to loosen its hold on each thought, the overall feeling of the mind can start to change in small, gradual ways. The same reflections may still appear, though they no longer pull focus with the same strength. This shift often feels subtle at first. a thought comes into awareness, though it does not immediately lead into another. There is a slight pause where attention remains present without needing to move. Within that pause, a different rhythm begins to form. The mind is still active, though it is no longer moving as quickly between impressions. Space begins to appear between thoughts, not as a forced silence, but as a natural gap where nothing demands attention for a brief moment. In that space, the sense of fragmentation starts to soften. Attention is no longer divided across as many points at once. It begins to gather more gently, without needing to hold everything at the same time. This does not require effort in the usual sense. It happens when the need to follow every thought begins to ease. As that easing continues, the mind feels slightly less crowded. Thoughts pass through, though they do not overlap in the same way. Over time, this creates a quieter experience of awareness. Attention is still present, though it feels less stretched across multiple directions. Fragmentation begins to give way to a more continuous flow, not because thoughts have stopped, but because they are no longer competing for the same space. As space between thoughts becomes more noticeable, attention begins to gather in a different way. The same mind that once moved quickly between many points starts to move with a slightly steadier rhythm. This change does not happen through force. It develops when attention is no longer pulled in as many directions at once. A thought appears and remains for a moment. Instead of immediately shifting away, awareness stays with it just long enough for it to feel complete. That sense of completion is important. When a thought is allowed to finish its natural movement, it no longer needs to return as frequently. Over time, this creates a more continuous flow. Attention no longer feels divided across many small fragments. It begins to move in a smoother, more connected way. Focus becomes easier to recognize, not because the mind has become quieter, but because its movement is no longer scattered across multiple directions. In this state, concentration starts to feel less effortful. Attention rests more naturally on what is present without needing to be held in place. The mind is still active, though it is no longer shifting as quickly or as often. Each thought has a little more room to begin and end without interruption. As this pattern continues, the feeling of fragmentation fades further. What once felt divided begins to feel more unified. Attention finds its way back to a steadier form, not by being controlled, but by being allowed to settle into a calmer rhythm. As attention begins to gather into a steadier rhythm, the mind often starts to feel calmer in a quiet and natural way. The change may be gentle, though its effect becomes easier to notice over time. When focus is no longer spread across many small directions, awareness has less to hold at once. That reduction creates a sense of internal ease. The mind remains active, though it no longer feels stretched. This steadier state allows attention to stay closer to the present moment. Thoughts still appear, though they do not pull the mind away as quickly as before. Each reflection has a little more room to arrive and pass without creating the same sense of interruption. In that rhythm, mental activity feels more ordered. The mind is not forcing calm. It is simply moving with less friction. A calmer attention also changes how the day is experienced. Tasks may feel slightly clearer, and quiet moments may feel less crowded. Awareness begins to trust that it does not need to hold everything at once. This trust matters. When the mind no longer expects constant movement, attention becomes easier to maintain. The feeling of steadiness grows through repetition. Each moment of uninterrupted focus teaches the mind that a slower rhythm is possible. Each quiet pause shows that awareness can remain present without needing to divide itself again. Over time, this creates a more stable inner atmosphere. Attention is still flexible, though it no longer feels pulled apart in the same way. In that atmosphere, the mind begins to recognize a different kind of clarity. Not a sharp or forced concentration, but a softer and more continuous presence. Even as attention becomes steadier, the mind does not need to become perfectly still for that sense of ease to remain. Movement continues in a natural way. Thoughts still arrive, and awareness still shifts at times. The difference is subtle, though it changes how that movement is felt. Instead of being pulled in many directions at once, attention now moves with more continuity. One moment flows into the next with less interruption. There is less urgency to follow every thought. Some pass through without being held, and others stay only as long as they need to. This does not require effort. It grows from familiarity with a slower rhythm that has already begun to form. In that rhythm, the mind no longer feels responsible for keeping track of everything at once. Space becomes something that can exist without needing to be filled. Even when attention briefly scatters again, the return to steadiness happens more easily. The mind remembers this quieter way of moving. That memory is gentle, though it is reliable. It does not force attention back into place. It simply allows it to settle again when the moment is ready. Over time, fragmentation becomes less defining. It may still appear, though it no longer feels like the only way attention can exist. A different possibility has already been experienced, one where awareness moves with less strain and more continuity. That possibility does not need to be maintained perfectly. It only needs to be noticed again and again as it quietly returns. And in that quiet return, attention begins to feel less like something that must be controlled, and more like something that can be trusted to find its own way.